Hello, everyone, and welcome. Test. Okay, hello, everyone, and welcome. It's my great pleasure to introduce our KITE Research Round speaker today, Professor Lueder Kahrs. Dr. Kahrs is a 10-year stream assistant professor in the Department of Mathematical and Computational Sciences at U of T Mississauga, with a cross appointment in the Institute of Biomedical Engineering and also the Department of Computer Science in St. George campus, and also otolaryngology, uh, head and neck surgery at the University of Toronto. He founded the Medical Computer Vision and Robotics Lab and works towards robot autonomy in surgery. He got his doctoral degree in engineering from the Department of Informatics at the University of Karlsruhe in Germany in 2009, and his diploma, which is comparable to combined master's and bachelor's degree in physics in 2002 from the University of Bremen in Germany. Since 2003, his research has been focused on computer and robot-assisted diagnosis and therapy. Before coming to Toronto, he was a senior scientist in mechanical engineering at the University of Hanover, as well as the Lower Saxony Center for Biomedical Engineering, Implant Research and Development, both in Hanover, Germany. Before that, he was a postdoctoral researcher in Düsseldorf in Germany, and also in Nashville, Tennessee in the US, in clinical settings. He has authored and co-authored over 150 publications, including 45 journal papers, 3 book chapters, and 4 books as an author or editor, and also holds several granted patents. Please join me in a welcome round of applause to welcome Dr. Kahrs.
Thank you, Babak. Very nice introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for attending this talk. Yeah, I just put this on while Babak giving an introduction, because then I can skip over that. So we will learn a little bit today about my research group, and I hope you then find some inspiration for your own research. So because I hope, because it's so close to yeah, Mississauga, U of T, KITE, UHN, that I hope there will be some overlap in some interest and research. So my research group is called the Medical Computer Vision and Robotics Laboratory, and still need to learn which button I had to press. And so in that logo, you already see like a camera aperture and like robot joints, like an end effector of like a robot that could be a needle, like a scissors instrument, laser, drill, or electrocautery tool. So which means that we are trying to use computer vision to control robots for like robot autonomy. So I always say, right, autonomous driving is solved. Now let's go to the next stage and do some medical robot autonomy. And so we aim with that to advance the physician's skills. It should not be to replace them. It could, of course, but this is maybe even too far away from the end of my research career. But it could be like an assistant to the physician that then yeah, give guidance, says, oh, there's something coming up, there's a vessel coming up, there's a wrist structure coming up, be careful, or something that does some easy task in the beginning, like an autonomous suction in the operating theater, where then there's some blood in the way when doing some implantations. And so with that, we then combine methods from AI, from computer vision, mixed reality, and robotics for applications in the operating room. So the direction of research are then, on the one side, clinical applications, and on the other side, basic science. With basic science, I always have to be a little bit careful, because as a trained physicist, This is not astronomy, or this is not pure math or so, but for a roboticist and computer vision guy, we are doing some basic science. And this basic science that I then mean, we do robotics with some levels of autonomy that are not there yet at the moment in existing systems. And on the other hand, whenever then robotics cannot be applied because it's too far down the road, I have used mixed reality or augmented reality a lot because transformations are the same. You just reduce robot kinematics or some path planning, but you can still visualize to the physicians what they need to do with augmented reality as replacement, that then the robot does exactly the autonomous way of the task. And then it's more towards like a decision support and not like really task autonomy of a robot. And then we have like some underlying methods and data. So we are using clinical data for our work, especially, for example, for endoscopy, then doing a lot of computer vision and computer graphics method, applying simulations, often physics-based, using artificial intelligence. And then we often do phantom studies instead of really applying things at a patient because methods are too far down the road, and even applying for ethics votum seems to be unreasonable for some of the works that we have done. But you will see the different levels in the next slide. So I will dive with like in first example into some work of like a clinical application. And so that started when I almost arrived here in Toronto a couple of years ago, that those two nice doctors, Dr. Vito Forte from KITE in Toronto and Dr. Joe Davis from here just in the neighbor building, asked me, so can we build together an augmented reality app for our residents or fellows that help us to educate them skin flap procedures? So, and that's what we then started with. So we looked into like some of the basics. So physicians are often then taking a photo of the patient and drawing those lines for like facial procedures, facial reconstructive procedures, to then align some skin flaps. So if they need to remove a lesion, for example here, right? So how then to close the wound again for this patient. And so there are different flap types, and those flap types can then be oriented along those lines of relaxed skin tension. So my student Wenji, that's her, she have worked in her master's and during like some industry setting already on augmented reality. She came up with like a very easy example to overlay then those different lines of relaxed skin tension. They are adapting, so she used like a regular face tracker, and we will see some of the face tracker work later on as well. And so that means that physicians can then orient those skin flaps. Please be aware now we will see an intraoperative photo that might make some discomfort for some. So if you are a little bit scary with intraoperative photos, then don't look to that slide. So this is like a defect from a patient. And so we see that when we now try to close that wound with like some stitches, we have to pull some skin from somewhere to somewhere to close that. And so the issue with that is if we, for example, just do a regular elliptical flap, that's how it's called, like just closing the wound with some stitches, we would then pull the eyelid down, and with that then it could lead to like a dry eye. A dry eye could lead to like a further infection. An infection in the eye could lead to blindness. Of course, this is a large staggered, if potentially this happens, then that. But still, surgeons want to avoid that. So that means that they are pulling some skin somewhere else. So they are cutting at some different, or cutting along some lines of these least skin tension, and then rotating the skin into this defect. And with that, then there will be no pulling on the eyelid when then closing the wound. Either you more pull from skin from the ear direction. So this means that what should this app or this helper assistant method now should be able to teach physicians? It should be able to visualize the skin flap. For example, what are the cutting lines then? So you cut out this rhomboid. This is a rhomboid flap. So you cut out this rhomboid, take out that lesion, and then move some skin over in that defect, similar to what we have seen in the on the slide before. So that means then that the final suture line or the final scarring would look like then this. And so that would be very helpful, for example, for like physicians to test, or even also for telling the surgeon how the surgical outcome would mostly look like, what they have to see then in their face from that on. And of course, there are different flap types and also different flap rotations. So we could rotate that rhomboid flap 90 degrees or even 100 degrees or even flip it. And then there is, of course, those elliptical flaps, and there are maybe 5 or 10 even more flap types that could be used for closing a wound after a lesion was removed in a patient's face. So that are then the two tasks for this app. So to either give a recommendation, what is the best flap type and best flap rotation, and the other is to educate physicians and also patients what then the surgical outcome and the cutting lines have to be. So that means that we can look to this more from like then the solving the problem aspect. So here we then build from like a patch around the nose, then an FEM simulation, and then started to execute the simulation, the resuturing after this empty part is removed. And then we also see how much stress is then here around the nose. And with that, we see then how less pulling of the tissue comes from like a certain direction. So this is the only part where then tissue around the nose, or in that other example around the eye, would then be leading to some other problems, like some runny nose or, as I said, dry eye or so. And similarly here, right, so we can then also just texture this FEM simulation, this point mesh or this triangulated mesh, and with that then even see the surgical outcome, how even if we remove the line again, right, how good then, for example, some skin matches some other skin color later on, or sometimes it's a problem with like facial hair. If you move larger parts, from one location to the other that it then does not look like right. So we can all plan this and get a feeling about this. And here's like another simulation where we have done some more single suture one after the other, where we then see how nicely we can create this FEM simulation. By the way, this is an FEM simulation from a colleague from mine, or even us from the computer science department. It's an open source FEM library, which we could just use, so we are not using any commercial FEM tools. This is like a freely usable tool. And then how does then an augmented reality pipeline would look like? We have, again, like a patient that has a lesion. We take out like a quasi-round patch of tissue, and then use that patch to then execute this calculation of the rhomboid flap here, closing the wound, and then overlaying this patch again onto the physician's face. So that means that we can easily then show this in a mixed reality setting, how the surgical outcome then looks like for the skin flaps. So I've showed this video before. So that's kind of the one part of the app to demonstrate the relaxed skin tension lines. And the other part is then the kind of training app, where then the physician can place the different flap types over the lesion, and then play around with it, oriented along those relaxed skin tension lines, and even then swap the different flap designs. And the goal of this work is, of course, then to even suggest or help with decision-making which flap type is then the best. So we then need to calculate all of those different flap types for that region and then propose those different ones to them. Often, for example, you see, especially for elliptical flap, that physicians forget in that if they should orient it along that line or perpendicular to that line. So even in some textbooks, you see wrongly created skin closures from wounds after some lesion removal. So yeah, this app should be kind of the safety net for them to check if they are operating in the right direction and cutting some skin out along the right paths. So here we see, for example, some of the other, or some basic simulation of pulling some skin, and this includes like some muscle fiber direction now in different direction. We see here some like higher stress values, and here, so we have kind of implemented some additional anisotropy behavior in the skin. That's often the case, right, the most stress is then exactly perpendicular to this least skin tension lines. You can imagine, or that's what it's behind the visualization of those lines, that we show with that what are kind of similar lines of tension and less tension. And with that, then we have those patches then oriented when we calculate the best orientation of those skin flaps. And that's exactly what Wenji, my student, has done. She then calculated for those different sutures then some forces what are needed to close the wound along this scarring, and then found out that, of course, this point is the point with the maximum suture force. And we then can create for like all different kinds of degrees how to rotate the rhomboid flap. We then can see how much the maximum suture force would be with different rotations, and with that then help with like an automated method to predict then what is the best rotation for the physician to create then those cuts of the rhomboid flap, and then also how to make then the resuture happening. And that was done with like different elastic parameters from the FEM simulation. And with that, we found kind of a clear minimum. And also with like those two arrows, we showed what the actual textbook knowledge from physicians is, which might be right for a very small K1, one of the parameters, but often this is very, very much on the border of what people state when they estimate the skin's elastic properties. So usually it's the default value, or the default value what is given in literature for skin elasticity. This is kind of the orange line that has a minimum more like here was like 100 and maybe to 80, but not was like 120 or 300 degrees of rotation. So that means that we have shown, at least when analyzing the suture force, that the textbook knowledge is, or might be wrong, should be reconsidered, because you have to turn the rhomboid flap a little bit more clockwise to then be closer to the optimum when it's about like the having the less suture forces for those flaps. And this might be very much needed whenever the skin is very, very stiff, right? And it's very difficult to close the wound, because then the wound will be open all the time, and then there will be some wound healing problems. So we want to make this a right decision. Of course, at the moment, this only considers the suture force analysis, and there might be other reasons why physicians choose the 120 degrees values in the past. So for example, it could be the case that they want to hide the scarring in some wrinkles, and those wrinkles are more in that direction. But still, right, so the number might be wrong, wrongly set in textbooks. So this should be further investigated, at least from us, and I show some of the directions at the end as well. So of course we then had to think about, okay, so this is just an FEM simulation, but we need to validate this somehow. And so one idea is then to validate this on 2D photographs, and physicians always take photos kind of pre-op when then drawing how they want to cut, and then post-op, of course, with the scarring or with the suture line, Those photos are just 2D photos, often or hopefully from our perspective, from the same viewpoint. So there's no tool at the moment where they take kind of 3D, or it's not in clinical use, where they take 3D photos or even have like an app that always take it from the same pose from the patient. So we have to manually kind of register those two photos. And of course, you can try to do that to overlay kind of this photo kind of projected forward with our skin flap simulation that then has the same scarring line than this, right? So our FEM simulation can create out of this line kind of the final suture line that is this, and then we kind of overlay both so they match kind of properly. Or we can even use just some facial features as much as we can get and try to morph the image so that it's a perfect fit. So when doing this, we found larger errors, of course, because it is almost impossible to bring this picture from one pose to the other camera pose. So we then came up with the idea, okay, so let's try to use those face trackers again that Wenji used before for the augmented reality app, and then use those features to then kind of texture that 3D representation of the face with this photo, and then being able to do this for both of the pre and post-op scenarios, and then compare that better in a 3D space. So, but we figured that most facial tracker do not work very well with such occluded faces, or right. So the reason behind that only that region of the face is, of course, patient privacy. That physicians don't want to take the whole face photo, and so we have to deal with like some partial face photographs from them. So then the idea was to use kind of stable diffusion, which is kind of like an image, or can serve as an image completion technique, and using then this stable diffusion to then apply a face tracker for all those images. In fact, we were not using this, or to generate this image or these two images, we not only use stable diffusion once, but use stable diffusion 100 times, and then kind of created this average estimated face from this pre and post-op scenario. And this is exactly what's shown here from the pipeline. So first we removed virtually kind of the scarring or the drawing of the face, because otherwise when then using stable diffusion and there's something more weird in the photo, then some very weird comes out of this when using stable diffusion, at least for our prompts. And then we created kind of like 100 faces. And then on each of those 100 faces, we then used those facial landmark trackers, and then created kind of an average facial landmark descriptor or description for all the faces. And those images, this kind of then pose, we then used again for the pre-op and the post-op image, calculated the the average landmarks, did the triangulation, and with that, then we were able to do kind of a proper registered images from two different, slightly different face poses. To then, evaluate again how well our whole method then works. So we then created some scenarios, right? With just the eyes occluded, some low occlusion, medium occlusion, or high occlusion. Even for the eye and the low occlusion, we found out that we have 25 to 30% failures when using the face tracker. So this is not reliable, and that's also because why we started this at all, because we found out that it didn't work with those occlusions, and when it then goes to like higher occlusions, of course, it can lead to then even 100% failure rates of the facial tracker, which then shows the need first of all for this. And then we looked, for example, for the normalized Hausdorff distance for those different methods, and were able to show that our stable diffusion method is the one with the lowest Hausdorff distance. Hausdorff distance is kind of to compare like different paths in 2D or even 3D as well. Yeah, and with that, then right, we can morph the 3D faces even better onto each other, and then can analyze, as I said before, right, to feed forward the simulation here towards like the final scarring result, and then combine the two scarring with each other. And that's kind of what is also shown here in this images. And then I told you before, right? So we might not be at the end with this complete journey and saying surgeons and surgeons' textbooks are wrong, because at the moment the simulation that we have done were just 2D, and some Mikhail reviewer also said, yeah, maybe you should look to 3D and find out if this is the reason why your methods and textbook results are different. So we then investigated on some methods on like 3D methods with like different layers of tissue, had like an investigation of different underminings. So that's what physicians do. So they go under the first layer of skin and loosen this up to then the deeper layer of skins, or even sometimes then to bone, depends on how thick the skin is in that example. And so we were able to show that our previous simulation is not too much different, the 2D simulation, from this 3D simulation. Of course, now people say, okay, let's do it on a curved surface and do it really on like whatever MRI, segmented images, and so on. So we need to go forward in that direction to then prove that there's a better way to describe, or a better value how to orient the skin flap. And then, of course, some work needed to then find out a metric between different skin flap types to then find really the best recommendation for surgeons in which scenarios they should do what. Okay, and this is kind of like a beginning of like some other endeavors from me, the robotics application, because at the moment, people are working at like a surgical robotics challenge where they have kind of a robot autonomously doing such suturings in simulation. So they are kind of training an autonomous agent to do this, this skin flap procedure, kind of this modified elliptical flap that we see here. And so they are kind of working on creating those environments in simulation. And yeah, people have shown already great results. And we are also working on something similar. So also at KITE, where we are working with together and also using their Da Vinci research kit, they have created some work to close some wound here in a modified scenario. And so the idea is to then use this more elastic simulation. So the simulation that I showed before, the FEM simulation that allows deformation, because here this is all rigid, right? So, and we need something that where then the tissue deforms when puncturing the needle into the tissue. So that's some work that the work I showed before with the skin flap could then profit for our robotics work in the future. So, and that's what I'm now diving in. Some previous work of mine that I have done were like working on like a robotic laser microsurgery project. It was a project funded from the European Union. So that was some work where I worked or where I was as a senior scientist. And so we created a small-sized endoscope with like 2 cameras, like a micro laser scanner, some illumination. And so this were then guided through like a virtual microscope, so like a surgeon's console, and the surgeon is able to draw a line on the endoscope images to then say where the laser cut should happen. And so to then place the laser cut in the right depth, we were creating like just a guidance method for physicians to then place it kind of in the green region. So the laser cut should then be placed here. So this is just from stereo, a trifocal approach to then go from the stereo camera to the 3rd focal point from the laser projector to then be able to ablate in the smallest or with the smallest diameter, right, with the most focused laser to then make the cut most narrow. This is like on vocal folds. So we are really ablating or cutting on a very, very delicate tissue. Everything that you remove more from the vocal folds than it should be, might lead to a very different voice. So it's a very delicate thing. And so to then bring not only this from the computer vision aspect, then also to the mechatronics side, we then applied kind of like on the surgical microscope that we have seen, surgical endoscope that we have seen before, then like some linear axis to then bring this always in the same distance. So then we can set it kind of to the optimal value, and it will then adapt kind of the focal length automatically. And here we see some of the experiments. Oh, yes, I wanted to show this again. So here the physician now kind of creates this augmented reality or whatever ablation line on this endoscope images. And this is kind of the line where then the laser ablation will happen. We see at the moment kind of the virtual laser spot jumping around and the ablation line. And now we can kind of deform the tissue. Now we will switch off the virtual overlay or the augmented overlay and switch on the real laser and can deform the tissue. So we are compensating kind of the tissue movement and can ablate further and further. So this is how I kind of left then Germany and came here to Toronto, and some of my NSERC Discovery Grant is about continuation of this. So what is behind this is also, again, like a tracker method with like a synth plate spline algorithm that tracks kind of this laser location or laser path. So you are never kind of cutting one time through tissue with lasers. You are always cutting kind of in a repetitive way. That's also why it's so important to track the tissue in that scenario. Here we see the same green line overlaid again with like a tracker method. So here it's from a Da Vinci surgical operation. So we can kind of deform tissue, and the laser path will kind of always be in the same position. So we do not need to care finding those spots again when we do repetitively laser cuts here. As I said, so that was kind of the time when I moved my research from Europe to here. So 2019, when also this review paper came out where they analyzed what has been done with the Da Vinci Research Kit, with the Da Vinci robot, and at SickKids. And I joined kind of SickKids Hospital in the very beginning. So they kind of just purely worked on hardware implementation and integration, so building all these very fancy small-sized tools, which is very unique, so very much fascinating. So I thought, okay, so just dump all the things that I have done in hardware. I'm just concentrating on the imaging and automation part when collaborating with them. And so that's how then our work or our collaboration with them started. So we build it on top of ideas from work that was published at the London Hamlin Symposium in 2019. They created like a DVRK XR, so augmented reality, mixed reality simulator. And here it's kind of like a very basic scenario. We are using Unity 3D, like a game engine, mixed reality developer program to create this robot simulation. My opinion is that this is very, very good for students to learn because there are so many tutorials for Unity to learn, and some of the robotics simulators are kind of a little bit too complicated or not that well documented. Of course, we could also work on that to make this better, but my way was kind of to move forward and concentrate on getting kind of the Da Vinci Research Kit into Unity. And it has quite good physics and collision modeling, which we see in this very easy scenario where we kind of push a block into the target zone. I always say this is similar to kind of lifting up some tissue in like a laparoscopic scenario, right? If you put this artificial block in the right location, then this is a very similar task. Of course, you have to solve again the problem of like tissue tracking, but I have showed this before. How could this be done? And so we have some robotics integration already happening in Unity. There's a very nice package called ML agents that can train kind of reinforcement learning environments in a nice way. And there's a large even asset store where you can buy different tools, different virtual objects. And that's what we then also have done in the past. We also see that our complete framework not only entail that we can use the DaVinci Research Kit, we can also create, and we have that in real as well, like a kind of toolbox for those DaVinci tools that we can mount onto a surgical, onto a regular non-surgical robot. And with that, we can then create the same scenarios. Here we see this robot with like a more fancy surgical environment. This is for like a twin-twin syndrome scenario where also then some laser ablation happens to share the nutrition in a more equal way. So you are cutting some vessels in that on the placenta, and with that then you kind of creating again same-sized twins or almost same-sized twins. And this is this is like a project that we are working on as well together with the Ontario Fetus Center, where we kind of create then best ablation paths and how to do this or how to assist this robotically. This will not be the final solution, of course, for them, but will give us some room to then investigate on this more realistic scenarios than, for example, this push block scene. So in general, we built up, or those guys, Mustafa and Radian, both PhD students, built up like a vision-based robot control pipeline. So at the moment, the surgeon is looking, of course, into the surgeon's console, and then probably through his brain, the information is then processed into like hand movements to then manipulate the robot arms. So that's how the DaVinci robot at the moment works, and how also our control framework works. So I was, because it is very hard to calibrate the robot, and a lot of people are trying that and are not happy with it because it's a tendon-driven robot and it's not made for automation per se, but people are trying things because it's the most commonly used robot. So we decided a different route to use kind of a visual servoing approach, where then the only information you give kind of the system is like a view from wherever onto your scene. And we are doing this in simulation to train our reinforcement training pipeline. So this go through like then a reinforcement learning model, or will be then trained completely here. And the robot in simulation executes then those different tasks, like pushing the block somewhere, or we will see some further examples. And then we are able to just swap this out. We can give this trained reinforcement learning model, not the camera not the virtual camera image, but the real camera image, the real endoscope image even, and then execute not in simulation, but on the real robot. And then the same things will happen. So first we had struggled a little bit that in simulation, the surgical robot will push this block into the target zone, but the endoscope or the real robot with the endoscope will create some failures, will not push the block at the right location. And but then after some further refinement, and we had with like some base model, only 20% success rate, while in simulation, everything is fine and works perfectly. But then with like some full model and even more slippery physics than usual, so we had kind of like an ice surface instead of like a normal surface with some friction, we found out that we can push the block in the target zone with like 100%. And so this can now be transferred to a lot of different scenarios. We have, of course, the simulation line here, or row here was like where we kind of push the block at the above corner and roll it, so some fine manipulation, and then also some cutting scenario, and also some rope manipulation where we then said, okay, we can push this rope into like the target zone, or we can then even interact with the rope in a different way and cut it at a target position. And we're then able to create a very nice simulation where we can interact with the rope, can create some additional tension, can even with open blades kind of push the rope. But when we then close the scissor and we have kind of the right colliders and some very good description method, how the learning will happen then in place, we can create this autonomous cutting. This all based on like a particle physics model where we can cut then at different location, train this, execute then in real. And I always say we can kind of throw this rope now over every surface in our scene, right? We can do a 3D reconstruction of our scene with like a stereo endoscope, what they have in place. We can just put like a virtual rope over every surface and then cut this rope. And even with like larger camera movements, it is possible to execute this cut in a good way. So the only thing that, as I said, is now left is to bring this rope in our surgical scene at the right location, and then we can start cutting from like the first cut. Then we switch off that first rope and switch on a second rope, and with that, then we can cut along a path then in our surgical scene. And that's exactly what we are proposing in this paper here that is in revision at the moment, where we kind of concatenate ropes to like a grid, and then we can put this grid over every surface. And we have compared this with like other techniques from the literature. Yeah, and then one of my last slides, right, is then again switching from very simple scenarios, more benchtop scenarios, to then real surgical scenes. The better simulation we have, the better it is for our sim-to-real results then, of course, when we then try to create, for example, those laser ablations then in real life after we have trained the agent then in simulation a lot. Yeah, with that, I like to conclude. And so we are working on soft materials, and we are concentrating on cutting. My takeaway is that we need accurate soft materials in simulation and also photorealism for making this all happen. For me, as I said also in the beginning, mixed reality is kind of, for us, a downgrade, because we can we can always go from robotics applications back to mixed reality when something does not work, or try things out with physicians in a mixed reality setting if they feel not comfortable to test things on a robot. And yeah, so at MedCVR, we do a lot of research in cutting. Yeah, thank you so much. I acknowledge, of course, all the people that do the work. I'm not on that photo, so all my students and, of course, some of our funding. And yeah, thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. I was just wondering, do you have a timeline of how long does it take for example, for the first technology, for the guidance, for the cuts, to reach the surgeon or the surgical team? So how long does it take for the technology to reach that end point?
Okay, so the first application where we are working with physicians together, so that has started a PhD ago, right? Or the student is kind of in her last year. And so we are doing some studies together with physicians at the moment, how they accept the usage of that app. So this means like, yeah, having this study being set up took us 3.5 years, 4 years. And until we really have a tool that they can use in their daily life, I guess it would take another 5 years to make this, yeah, a prototype that they, or that we can then deploy through the App Store or whatever. But it would take another, and of course the other, or that's also why I call it basic science, the robotics work, right? I always say this would take another 20 years until there will be some higher level of autonomy really in the surgical operating room. Maybe a little bit earlier, we don't know. So I always think back 20 years ago, where then autonomous driving were not really existing. Of course, people have started to work on this, but now we have some cars in some safe environments or some easy street scenes driving around, and it works. This will, of course, as I was kidding at the beginning, this will also take some other 5 or 10 years until it's really, really everywhere. But I believe in that this will be some helping tool in the future for logistics, and then also, of course, for our scenario in the operating room.
Hi. So I have a question. Do you think that patients also like to have a robot to do surgery for them?
This is a very good question, right? So also, again, the analogy or analogon with like the autonomous driving, right? Do you like to sit in a car as a passenger that drives you autonomously around? Does the taxi driver like that there's some ambition to make or to replace them? Probably not, right? Similar with surgeons, similar with patients. We have to give them a lot of trust that this is a safe technology. And it's also the question, is the physician capable of doing the procedure that is available, right? With a lot of shortage in the health system, right? Is there enough staff available that can do all the surgeries that are needed? And I think in those scenarios where where there's no surgeon available that can do it, or a surgeon that celebrated their birthday on the day or on the evening before when you come in the operating room, right? So there are scenarios where patients think differently about having a robot doing work on them autonomously because they might die when, and those might be the scenarios which could be tested first. But I don't know.
Did you do any interview, like talk to patients and ask some questions? For example, do you like to have an experience, or for example, you can work with the laser and to see how it's going to cut, for example, just a fruit to see how it's working?
Mm-hmm. No, we have not done this. So I have by myself 4 years training in like clinical settings. So that's why I'm adding this always to my CV. So I was like postdoc in like labs where they actually worked with patients on new technologies. So I know a little bit how this works. And but yeah, it needs some more studies in this. I see myself capable of pushing this field forward, right? Similar than people were thinking autonomous driving is a cool field, and I want to push this forward. I'm ignoring at the moment as PI the part of does someone wants this, because I believe that this is a technique that will change our future. I don't know if in 20 years or in how many years, but it will change it.
This is so cool. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation, and it was a really neat application of AI in terms of generating the face. It was one of the more interesting applications that I've seen for sure. In terms of addressing the critique of applying these techniques on a 3D model, what are your current kind of plans to troubleshoot that? And what are kind of your barriers in applying that to a 3D model?
Yeah, so we are thinking that one next step could be testing this on like a pig model. Of course, not in the face of a pig, but at some location where we also know the course of the relaxed skin tension lines, right? They align with muscle fibers, or you can find this out in some way. And with that, then we can at least prove that also on in vivo skin, this can work, or this has some foundation. Yeah, but it's very hard to go now this step from pure simulation to real surgery, right? Of course, we can do also ex vivo and like human faces, but of course we all know that the skin elasticity is not the same than in ex vivo than in vivo. So yeah, it's challenging, but we have kind of a longer list what we also like to put then in the next CHR or whatever proposal, and then see how, what reviewers then think about this, and of course also collaborators.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if there are no other questions, it's 10 minutes past, and I notice some people are moving to other meetings.
Yeah.
So let's thank our speaker one more time. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for making your lunch break longer than expected.
Perfect.